Kokomi can be real valuable in a lot of teams, and this video will show you the top 5 team comps you can use with Kokomi. Now in all of these team comps you can either use Kokomi as an on-field damage dealer, or as an off-field support.
Nothing lasts forever.
If you're gonna use Kokomi as an on-field damage dealer without building her as crit Kokomi, then her best in-slot weapon will be her signature weapon, but you can also use the craftable weapon prototype Amber. As for artifacts, 4-piece ocean-hued clam set will be an ideal choice, as the 2-piece set effect provides her healing bonus, while the 4-piece set gives her damage bonus on the amount of healing she does, and she heals a ton of amount of HP, hence she can do significant amount of damage with this setup. But if you'll be using her as a support, then Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers will be a very good weapon choice, as it will give 48% attack to the character you will switch to from Kokomi, paired with 4-piece Tenacity of Millilith set which will give additional 20% attack to all party members whenever her elemental skill hit opponents, so she becomes really valuable as a support in this setup. Now let's see the team comps for Kokomi. The first team comp on the list is the Taser team. This team consists of 2 Electro for consistent Electro application, 1 Anemo for grouping the enemies as well as providing buffs to the team through 4-piece Viridescent Venera set, and Kokomi for Hydro application which will proc Electro charge reaction. Now, in my case I'm using Raiden Shogun and Yamiko as the 2 Electro units, but if you don't have them you can use other 5-star DPS like Kaching or Sino and pair them with an off-field Electro damage dealer like Fizhal. As for an Anemo unit I'm using Kazuha, but you can also use Venti or Sucrose, and at the last we have Kokomi. Now, let's look at the rotation for this team. So, you first want to start with Raiden Z-Skill, then use Kazuha Z-Skill to group all of the enemies, then set up Miko's Foxes, then use Kokomi Z-Skill, now use Miko's Burst to generate stacks for Raiden Shogun, then set up her Foxes again, then use Kazuha's skill followed by his Burst. And finally unleash Raiden Shogun's Burst. Now when your Raiden's Burst is in cooldown, use Kazuha Z-Skill, then set up Miko's Foxes. Then use Kokomi Z-Skill and now use her Burst until your other party members' skills are in cooldown, so you will mostly be using Kokomi's Burst to fill in between rotations or when you need emergency healing. Now there is another variation for this team as well, in which you can replace the Electro DPS with a Hydro DPS like Ayato or Child, but since I don't own any Hydro DPS unit, I'm using the former.
No touching.
Okay, let's talk about our second team comp, the Freeze team. This team works on the basis of freeze reaction which occurs when Cryo and Hydro meet. Now for consistent freeze reaction you'll ideally need 2 Cryo units for consistent Cryo application, 1 Anemo unit to spread Cryo in an AoE, and a Hydro unit for freezing the opponents. For this team, you want to use a Cryo DPS like Ganyu or Ayaka, then a support Cryo unit like Shinha or Rosaria for AoE damage, for Anemo use Kazuha Venti or Sucrose, and Kokomi for Hydro. Now I'm using Ganyu as my DPS because of her huge burst radius, then using Shinha as support because of her massive cryo buffs, then I'm using Kazuha as the Anemo unit because of his elemental damage bonus buff, and Kokomi for Hydro. Okay, now let's look at the rotation for this team. First start with Ganyu Z-Skill, then use her Burst, then Shinha's skill followed by her Burst.
Cryo incarnate.
Then use Kazuha Z-Skill and thereafter his Burst.
One with wind and cloud.
After that use Kokomi Z-Skill. Now use Ganyu Z-Skill followed by her charged shots. So the next team comp is the Bloom Freeze team. For this you need Dendro and Hydro which will trigger Bloom reaction, while Cryo will freeze the opponents, and Anemo will help in keeping the enemies frozen. Now you'll be using the Cryo unit as main DPS in this team comp, but you can also use Kokomi as an on-field damage dealer and in that case you should go for an AoE Cryo support like Rosaria. But in my case I'm using Ganyu as the Cryo DPS, Kazuha as the Anemo unit, Kokomi for Hydro and Nahida for Dendro. Now let's look at the rotation for this team. Start with Ganyu Z-Skill followed by her Burst. Then use Kazuha Z-Skill succeeded by his Burst.
One with wind and cloud.
Then use Kokomi Z-Skill, now Nahida Z-Skill and thereafter her Burst. Now use Ganyu Z-Skill followed by her charged shots to deal damage. The upcoming team comp is the Hyper Bloom team. Now for this you have to generate Dendro cores by using Dendro and Hydro, and when these Dendro cores are hit by Electro Hyper Bloom occurs which will make the Dendro cores target the nearest enemy. In this team you'll ideally need 2 Dendro units, 1 Electro and 1 Hydro, but if you have good Dendro applicator like Nahida, then you can swap out 1 Dendro unit with either Anemo, Electro or Hydro. Since I have Nahida, I swapped out a Dendro unit with Kazuha for more crowd control, so my Hyper Bloom team has Nahida, Kazuha, Miko, and Kokomi. Now let's look at team rotation. First start with setting up Miko's foxes, then use Kazuha's Z-skill followed by his burst.
Clouds high. The birds come.
Then use Nahida's skill and thereafter her burst.
Full of wisdom.
Then use Kokomi's Z-skill. Now you can unleash Miko's burst and set up her foxes again.
Right here. Emerge.
Then use Kazuha to group them.
One with nature.
Then use Nahida's Z-skill and now use Kokomi's burst.
Billowing
In this setup you can use Kokomi as your on-field damage dealer, but if you want you can also use a Dendro DPS like Alhaitham, or an Anemo DPS like Wanderer, or an Electro DPS like Raiden Shogun in this team comp, so go with whatever suits your playstyle. Now let's look at our next team comp, the Burgeon team. For this you need Hydro and Dendro to trigger Bloom reaction which will create Dendro cores. Now when these Dendro cores are hit by Pyro, the Dendro cores explode dealing AoE Dendro damage. This reaction is called Burgeon reaction. So this team also needs 2 Dendro units unless you have strong Dendro applicator like Nahida, then a Hydro unit and a Pyro unit. Now I'm using Nahida, so I've swapped out the additional Dendro unit with Kazuha for crowd control, then I'm using Kokomi for Hydro and Xiangling for Pyro. Ideally you should use Dihaya or Toma as the Pyro unit because their Pyro application frequency is perfect for Burgeon reaction, but I don't have either of them, hence I'm using Xiangling for this. Okay, so now look at the rotation for this team. First start with Kokomi Z-skill, then use Kazuha Z-skill to group the enemies followed by his burst.
One with wind and cloud.
Then use Nahida Z-skill and thereafter her burst. Then use Xiangling burst, and then use Kokomi's burst. Now Kokomi will stay on field so that she can apply Hydro consistently and trigger Bloom reactions, while Xiangling will keep triggering Burgeon reactions off field. So those were the top 5 team comps you can use with Kokomi. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did then please hit the like button, and if you have any doubts regarding any team comps then comment down below. Also, if you're new to my channel and want to see more videos like this then please consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching, peace.